It's strange how clearly I can remember that morning in September 2012, like my life was split into before and after, and that particular day was the invisible crack that started it all. Back then, I was 31, living in a modest two-bedroom townhouse just outside of Columbus, Ohio. I worked as an assistant branch manager at a regional bank, not the most glamorous job in the world, but stable. Predictable. I used to think predictable was a good thing. Stability meant safety, right? Or at least, that's what I told myself. At that time, my wife, Claire, and I had been married for almost 5 years. We met in 2006, in one of those cliché love-at-first-sight ways that movies always oversell, except it felt real to me. She was a new teller at the same bank where I worked, and she had this calm confidence that drew people in. She wasn't loud or flashy, just effortlessly charming. She had long auburn hair, green eyes that could shift from warm to icy in seconds, and a smile that could soften almost anyone. I'd just gotten out of a long relationship back then, and I told myself Claire was different, that she was the kind of woman who wouldn't hurt me. We got married in a small ceremony in her hometown in Dayton. Nothing fancy. Just 50 people, some cheap wine, a borrowed sound system, and a promise that felt solid. Our early years were good. Not perfect. We fought about small things, like how I never folded laundry right or how she spent too much on candles and home decor, but we always made up. That was our thing. We'd have a fight, I'd drive out to get her favorite takeout, she'd cry a little, and we'd make up like the world was back in balance again. I didn't realize then that she had a pattern. I mistook making up for love, when it was actually manipulation. I didn't know yet that every tear she shed had purpose, and every apology was a tool. Around 2014, we started trying for kids. We were both working full-time, and money was tight. I remember feeling this pressure, not from her at first, but from the world around us. My friends were buying houses, having babies, posting family photos on Facebook with those cheesy captions about blessings. And I wanted that. I wanted to be the kind of man who could give his wife everything she wanted. I started working longer hours, applying for promotions, pushing harder. Claire would always say, "You're working too much," but in the same breath she'd talk about wanting a bigger house or how her co-workers' husbands surprised them with trips or jewelry. It's funny how love blinds you. I thought she was just dreaming big. I didn't see that she was slowly measuring me against other men, finding me lacking. We finally bought our first home in 2015, a 3-bedroom place in Westerville. It wasn't huge, but it had a yard, a little porch swing, and the kind of quiet neighborhood where kids played until dusk. I was proud of that house. Every time I'd pull into the driveway, I'd get this small burst of pride, like I'd achieved something tangible. Claire posted photos of the house on Instagram, tagging every brand, every furniture piece. I didn't think much of it then, but now when I look back, it feels like she was already building a stage, not a home. The first real cracks began around 2016. She'd started hanging out more with her coworkers, a new group of people from the accounting firm she'd joined after leaving the bank. She'd always been social, but this was different. Nights out turned into weekends away for team-building retreats. When I'd ask who was going, she'd list a few girls I'd never met, and somehow, I never got introduced to them. I didn't want to be that husband who pried, so I pretended to trust her, told myself that was what love looked like. We weren't fighting more, but we were talking less. It was like we were two people sharing a space rather than a life. I'd come home from work and find her on her phone, scrolling through Instagram or Pinterest, lost in some other world. She'd glance up and smile, but it never quite reached her eyes. It's hard to explain. It was like living with a stranger who wore your wife's face. In late 2017, she suggested we open a joint savings account. "For our future," she'd said. I remember her exact words because they felt sweet at the time. She said, "I just want us to be aligned, financially, emotionally, everything." I thought that was maturity, partnership. We opened the account, and I began transferring a portion of my salary into it every month. At first, it felt good, like we were building something together. I didn't know she'd already started draining it, little by little, long before I noticed. Money became the quiet undercurrent of our lives. Every big argument we had somehow circled back to it. She'd say things like, "We work so hard and have nothing to show for it," or, "I just want to live, not survive." I used to feel guilty, like I wasn't doing enough. She had this way of making me feel like I was always on the edge of failure, even when things were fine. Then came 2018, the year everything began to shift for real. I got promoted to branch manager. It was a big deal for me. I was finally making close to 6 figures, and I thought this would fix everything. I thought maybe Claire would feel secure, that we could start trying for a baby again, maybe travel. For a few months, it actually felt like things were improving. We took a trip to Florida that summer, rented a beach house, laughed like we hadn't in years. I remember thinking, maybe we just needed a break from the grind. But behind those smiles, she was already planning something else. I didn't know it yet, but she'd met someone during one of her company's client events, a man named Patrick. I wouldn't find out about him until much later, but I remember now, looking back, the subtle changes, the new phone she bought for work, the late-night texts she'd claim were from her boss, the way she started dressing differently, not drastically, just more polished, like she was performing for someone unseen. I should have known. I should have trusted that gut feeling that told me something was wrong. But I didn't. Because love, or what I thought was love, makes you deaf to your own instincts. By early 2019, I started noticing money missing from our joint savings. At first, I thought it was my mistake. I wasn't obsessive about checking statements, and when I saw withdrawals labeled as transfers, I assumed she'd moved money into another account or paid bills. When I asked her, she said she'd used it to cover credit card debt, and I believed her. Because why wouldn't I? We were supposed to be a team. But there was something else brewing, something darker than financial betrayal. I just didn't know it yet. That spring, she started pushing for a new car. Our Honda Accord was barely 5 years old, but she wanted something that reflected our success. I resisted at first, but eventually, she wore me down. We bought a white BMW. Well, I bought it, technically, since everything was in my name. She seemed so happy that day, posing with the car, posting photos online with captions about hard work paying off. And I felt proud again, like I was doing something right. Looking back, that day feels almost symbolic. Me signing the papers while she smiled for the camera, both of us pretending it was a celebration of love, when in truth, it was just another transaction in her game. The months that followed felt like calm before a storm. The kind of calm that feels too quiet, too. Still, she started traveling again for work. Chicago, Atlanta, once even Vegas. I didn't ask many questions. I thought, she deserves this. She's ambitious. But deep down, something in me had begun to break, a quiet unease I couldn't name. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her scrolling through her phone, smiling faintly at something. When I'd ask, she'd lock it instantly and say, "Just a funny meme." And I'd nod, pretending not to notice how her expression shifted from light to guarded in seconds. That's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't explode into your life. It seeps in, quietly, like water under a door, until one day you realize everything around you is soaked and cold and ruined. And by the end of 2019, my life was about to drown completely. I just didn't know it yet. The breaking point didn't arrive with thunder or chaos. It came quietly, disguised as an ordinary Tuesday in November 2019. It was cold that morning, the kind of gray, damp Ohio cold that seeps into your bones. I remember standing in the kitchen, waiting for the coffee to finish brewing, when I noticed Claire's phone buzzing repeatedly on the counter. Normally, she kept it glued to her hand, even when she was half asleep. But that morning, she'd left early for a meeting, saying she wouldn't be back until late. I wasn't the type to snoop. At least, I hadn't been. But something felt off. Maybe it was the way she avoided my eyes that morning, or the way she kissed my cheek instead of my lips before leaving. I remember staring at that phone, the screen lighting up over and over with a name I didn't recognize, Patrick R. I wish I could say I didn't look. I wish I could say I trusted her. But I did look. And in that single, shaky decision, the world I'd built around us began to crumble. There were messages, hundreds of them, stretching back months. Words I can't forget, no matter how hard I've tried. Little things, like her calling him babe, complaining about me, talking about how he doesn't make me feel alive anymore. And then worse things. Plans. Weekends. Hotel receipts attached in chat photos. A world she'd built outside of our marriage, with another man, while sleeping beside me every night. I remember the feeling in my chest. It wasn't anger at first. It was disbelief. My body went cold, my heart felt like it was beating in slow motion, and all I could think was, this can't be happening. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped her phone. I stood there for what felt like an hour, scrolling, reading, hoping to find something, anything that would make it make sense. She'd written things like, "He's a good man, but not my man," and "I can't wait until it's just us and I don't have to pretend anymore." Pretend. That word hit harder than any other. When she came home that night, I didn't confront her. I couldn't. I just watched her, really watched her, like I was seeing her for the first time. The way she smiled when she talked about her day. The way she asked how my day was, absent-mindedly, as if she already knew I'd say something simple like, busy. She didn't notice that I barely spoke at all. Over the next week, I turned into someone I barely recognized. I started digging, through our bank accounts, credit card statements, even old emails. And the deeper I went, the more I found. She hadn't just been cheating emotionally, she'd been financially draining me, too. The joint savings account, the one that was supposed to be, for our future, was nearly empty. Over $40,000 gone in less than a year. Transfers, luxury purchases, hotel bookings, all in her name, from our shared funds. And I had let it happen. It's strange how betrayal rewires your brain. You start seeing signs everywhere, remembering moments that didn't make sense before and realizing they were all clues. That conference in Vegas? She'd been with him. That work dinner in Chicago? Same man. That sudden insistence on handling all the bills herself? A way to hide the spending. I began collecting evidence, not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed proof. Proof that I wasn't going insane. Proof that the woman I loved had really done this. The hardest part wasn't discovering the affair. It was pretending everything was normal. For weeks, I lived two lives. One where I smiled, went to work, came home, and played the part of a husband, and another where I spent sleepless nights staring at spreadsheets and phone screenshots, piecing together the story of my own humiliation. Christmas that year was the worst. We went to her parents' house in Dayton, and I remember sitting there, surrounded by her family, smiling as they praised her for her hard work and great taste in gifts. Every time she laughed, I felt something twist inside me. She looked so effortlessly happy, like she'd erased me from her emotional landscape. That night, after everyone went to bed, I stood in her parents' driveway, staring at the frosted cars, and thought about driving away. Just disappearing. Leaving everything, the house, the marriage, the pain. But I didn't. I told myself I needed to face it. That I couldn't let her walk away from what she'd done so easily. In January 2020, I finally confronted her. Not in some dramatic movie-style blow-up, but quietly, at our kitchen table. I told her I knew about Patrick. I told her I knew about the money. She didn't cry. That was the worst part. She just looked at me with this tired expression, like I was the one inconveniencing her. I'll never forget her words, not verbatim, but the feeling. She said she'd fallen out of love, that these things happen, and that she deserved to be happy. She didn't deny the affair. She didn't even seem ashamed. When I mentioned the money, though, that was when she finally got defensive. She claimed she'd borrowed it and intended to pay it back. That's when something inside me snapped. I realized she didn't see it as betrayal, she saw it as survival. She'd been living off my trust like a parasite, and I'd been feeding her willingly. Within a week, she moved out. Said she was staying with a friend, though I later found out it was Patrick. The house felt haunted after she left, every corner filled with echoes of a life that had never really existed. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I'd go to work, sit at my desk, and stare blankly at spreadsheets. My coworkers thought I was sick. In a way, I was. The divorce process started soon after. Ohio has a 90-day waiting period, but it felt like 90 years. I wanted it to be over, but I also couldn't believe it was happening. Every time I saw her name on paperwork, it felt unreal. She didn't fight for much, didn't want the house, didn't want furniture. She just wanted her share of what was left, even though she'd already drained most of it. My lawyer said it was best to settle quickly, so I did. I signed away what little remained of our joint savings just to be done with her. The day the divorce was finalized, June 12, 2020, I sat in my car outside the courthouse for nearly an hour. My hands were shaking as I held the papers. It was official. The woman I once promised forever to was now a stranger with my last name wiped clean. I thought I'd feel relief. Instead, I felt hollow. Like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left only silence. Then, 2 weeks later, I got a message from one of her old co-workers, a woman named Sarah. She told me that Patrick wasn't who Claire thought he was. He was married, too. With kids. And he dumped Claire once his wife found out. At first, I didn't care. I told myself I was done with her. But part of me couldn't help feeling something. Not sympathy, not satisfaction, something darker and quieter. Maybe justice. Maybe irony. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't say a word. But I knew, deep down, that life had just started teaching her the same lesson she'd given me. And that was just the beginning of what would come next. The part where our roles began to reverse in ways neither of us could have predicted. Because in 2021, when she came back into my life asking for a small favor, I realized karma doesn't always arrive quickly, but when it does, it never misses. The fallout hit me in waves, slow, crushing waves that left me gasping, unable to find my footing. After the divorce in June 2020, I thought that once Claire was out of my life, the worst was behind me. But reality has a cruel way of sneaking in when you least expect it, and it wasn't just her absence that haunted me, it was the shadows she left behind in my own home, my finances, and my sense of self. I remember the first morning I woke up alone in our empty house. The silence was deafening. No laughter, no music from her phone, no sound of her hairdryer blasting in the bathroom. Just me, a coffee mug in hand, staring at the wall where she'd pinned some inspirational quote months ago. Life is short. Make it beautiful. I couldn't help but think of how hollow that sentiment felt now, knowing the woman who had plastered it there had been lying, manipulating, and betraying me at every turn. Work became unbearable at first. I tried to throw myself into my role as branch manager, but every spreadsheet, every client meeting, every balance sheet reminded me of how I'd trusted someone completely, only to be used. I couldn't focus. I'd find myself staring at the ceiling during conference calls, replaying messages, receipts, and late-night text conversations in my head, trying to make sense of it all. My co-workers noticed. Some asked if I was okay, others gave me sympathetic looks. I nodded and smiled, but it was all a mask. The real me felt fractured, like I'd been cut into pieces and someone had shuffled them around, leaving me unrecognizable. Financially, I was struggling too. The divorce had stripped me of the little savings we had left, and rebuilding was slow. I had a 6-figure salary, yes, but after paying legal fees, moving expenses, and adjusting to living alone, it felt like running on a treadmill that kept speeding up. I had no idea how to recover from the betrayal that wasn't just emotional but had eaten into my finances so thoroughly. Every time I saw a credit card statement or a bank notification, I flinched. Trust, it seemed, had a price tag. And I'd already paid more than I could afford. Friends tried to help. My college buddy, Mike, invited me to golf, or sometimes just to grab beers at a local pub. My sister called more often than usual, sensing my fragility. But I was distant. I didn't want their pity or advice. I wanted answers, closure, and sometimes I wanted revenge, though I wouldn't admit that to anyone. Instead, I buried myself in small routines. I'd wake up early, go for a run, shower, eat, go to work, and come home to the empty house. Rinse and repeat. It was monotony that felt safe, though the quiet gnawed at me relentlessly. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, imagining what she was doing, who she was with, how she was living in the aftermath of her own recklessness. And then came the first unexpected message, an email from her. The subject line read, "Small favor. Please." I nearly deleted it immediately, but some part of me, the part still wounded, the part still tied to a love I'd thought was real, opened it. She wrote, briefly, about some financial difficulty, about bills piling up, about not knowing who else to turn to. She was asking me for money. I laughed at first, a bitter, hollow laugh. I'd spent years building a life for both of us, only for her to squander it. And now she had the audacity to ask for help? To turn back to me, the man she'd betrayed? I wanted to reply with something cruel, something that would make her feel even a fraction of the despair she'd caused me. But I didn't. I deleted the message, told myself to move on. But that message planted a seed, a dangerous one. In the months that followed, the requests kept coming. Sometimes they were vague, "I just need a little help this month." Sometimes they were specific, "Can you cover rent until next week?" I ignored most of them. I blocked her on social media. I told myself that if I didn't respond, I was done with her forever. But people, or at least people like Claire, have a way of finding cracks in your armor. One day, a mutual acquaintance mentioned that she was struggling with medical bills. Another time, I overheard a coworker talking about her asking for loans from friends. And every time, a part of me, the part that had once loved her completely, flared up with a mix of guilt, anger, and disbelief. How could someone treat you so terribly and then act like you owed them your generosity? I started keeping a record, emails, messages, screenshots, even notes on the dates she asked for help. It was a sick kind of therapy, a way to catalog the manipulation so I could see it clearly. It helped, in a way, to externalize the chaos in my head. But it also made the betrayal more tangible, more permanent. I'd look at that record and feel my stomach twist in anger, humiliation, and something else, a profound sadness for what I had lost. By late 2020, I realized the emotional fallout wasn't just about Claire. It had seeped into every part of my life. I had trust issues that affected friendships and new relationships. I became wary, defensive, sometimes cold. I would second-guess people's intentions, wondering if they, too, were capable of such deception. My confidence, once steady and quiet, was fractured. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and constantly aware that someone could take advantage of me again. The isolation was worse. I started avoiding social events, avoiding friends who might mention her name, avoiding places we used to go together. The empty house felt like a mausoleum of memories. I couldn't walk past the kitchen without thinking about her laughter, couldn't sit on the couch without remembering arguments and reconciliations that had been meaningless in hindsight. Even minor life events became triggers. Seeing a couple hold hands on the street, hearing a song we used to play in the car, smelling a candle she'd loved, each small thing brought a flash of anger, despair, and longing all at once. It was like living in a constant emotional hangover, the world muted, everything tinted with shades of betrayal. But amid the despair, a subtle, dangerous thought began to take shape. Not revenge, exactly, not yet. More like anticipation. I kept thinking about her requests for money, the audacity, the nerve, the entitlement. And I wondered, what if I could control it? What if I could turn her dependence into something I could wield, even just slightly, as a form of power I had never felt during our marriage? It was a delicate line to walk. Part of me hated her, wanted nothing to do with her. Part of me wanted to see her humbled, to see her realize what she had done. And part of me still carried remnants of love, the kind that sticks even after betrayal, that whispers that maybe things could have been different. That line blurred quickly. By early 2021, I found myself quietly, almost subconsciously, shaping interactions to maintain leverage. I didn't call her back immediately when she asked for help. I set conditions, subtle ones at first, small repayments, little humiliations hidden in the guise of generosity. And each time, I watched her scramble, watched her realize that the man she'd hurt had learned to navigate the same cruelty she once used against me. The emotional fallout wasn't just punishment for her, it became a lesson for me, a crucible that forced me to understand boundaries, control, and the fragility of trust. I learned that love without respect was dangerous. That generosity without reciprocation was self-destruction. And that sometimes, the only way to reclaim your life after betrayal is to carefully, deliberately, step into a place of quiet power. By the end of 2021, I was different. Scarred, yes, but stronger. More guarded. More calculated. I had begun to understand that the world doesn't hand out justice in neat packages. You either take control of your own story or become a footnote in someone else's. Claire, meanwhile, had become a recurring shadow in my life, not physically, but financially and emotionally. Each new request was a reminder, each new lie a provocation. And I knew, deep down, that the game had only just begun. Because in every interaction with her from that point on, I realized the tables could be turned. And when they were, it wouldn't just be about money. It would be about dignity, pride, and finally, the last word in a story she thought she had already written. By early 2022, I realized that I had two options. I could either let Claire continue to walk over me, taking what she wanted without consequence, or I could start taking control of the narrative. For years, I had been the trusting, forgiving husband, the provider, the one who silently swallowed her betrayals. But now, the script was mine to rewrite. And, slowly, deliberately, I began to turn the tables. The first step was simple yet powerful: boundaries. I started responding to her requests for money with conditions, small but deliberate. Instead of outright lending her what she asked for, I'd reply with pointed, controlled measures. I can help, but only if you provide documentation of your expenses, or I can send half now, half next month if you commit to a repayment schedule. At first, she pushed back, whining, pleading, trying to guilt me with reminders of our history, of how I'd always been there for her. But I didn't cave. It was strangely satisfying to see her flustered. She was used to me bending, to prioritizing her comfort over my own. Now, the roles were reversed. Each time she scrambled to meet my terms, I felt a quiet vindication, like a long-held weight finally lifting. It wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense, not at first. It was about reclaiming power over a life that had been stolen from me. At the same time, I began to rebuild my life independently, without waiting for her to dictate my happiness. I moved into a new apartment in downtown Columbus, a place with more light, higher ceilings, and, importantly, no traces of her. I redecorated slowly, carefully, replacing everything that reminded me of our shared past. It was a cleansing ritual. Even small things, the couch, the rug, the kitchenware, became symbolic, each piece a statement that I was reclaiming my space, my life, and my dignity. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into it not just to distract myself, but to rebuild confidence and financial stability. Promotions, bonuses, and careful investments gave me a sense of security that I hadn't felt in years. I became meticulous with money, not just saving, but strategizing, learning about financial independence in ways I had never considered when I'd been co-managing funds with her. Every time she texted asking for help, I felt a mix of satisfaction and disbelief at the audacity that hadn't changed. But now I was prepared. Then came the moment that solidified my sense of power, the first real confrontation. By mid-2022, she had begun asking for help more frequently. Small amounts at first, a few $100s, then larger sums. Each time, I asked for proof, contracts, receipts, anything that showed her obligations and her inability to manage her finances. Sometimes, she'd try to manipulate the situation, appealing to guilt, nostalgia, or sympathy. But I didn't respond emotionally. I responded strategically. One evening in July, she sent an urgent message claiming she had an unexpected medical expense, $2,000. Normally, I would have ignored it, but this time I saw an opportunity. I requested all the bills, insurance claims, and bank statements. She hesitated, flustered, and finally sent incomplete, messy documents. I paused before replying. Instead of sending the money, I asked for a full repayment plan and insisted on monthly updates. Her desperation was palpable, and for the first time, I felt not anger or despair, but control. This control wasn't limited to finances. I began asserting myself in all interactions. I stopped apologizing for things I hadn't done. I stopped making excuses for her behavior. I stopped trying to justify what had been broken. Every encounter became a subtle assertion, I am no longer your victim. Socially, I began reclaiming my confidence as well. I reconnected with old friends I'd drifted from during the marriage, joined a local running club, and even started dating again. At first, I was cautious, hesitant, afraid that anyone I let in could betray me like Claire had. But I learned to set boundaries early, to trust selectively, and to recognize red flags before they became disasters. Each step of rebuilding my social and emotional life reinforced the sense that I had emerged from the wreckage stronger, wiser, and more self-reliant. Meanwhile, Claire's pattern of dependence became increasingly apparent. By late 2022, she was openly asking for help almost monthly. And each time, I carefully structured the terms. I'd lend small amounts, always with strict conditions, always keeping records, always asserting my authority in the situation. It was a strange dynamic. I wasn't punishing her maliciously, not exactly, but the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. She was no longer the one holding all the cards. I was. By early 2023, I realized that I could even use these interactions to teach lessons. Not through cruelty, but through consequence. She learned quickly that I was no longer a passive participant. When she asked for $1,500 for rent, I'd respond, "Only if you send me proof of all income sources for the last 6 months." When she claimed she needed money for a utility bill, I'd ask her to provide a budget for the month showing exactly how she would make it last. Slowly, she learned, often grudgingly, that I was no longer a blank check or a fallback. This transformation didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't always clean. I wrestled with guilt, even though I knew I was in the right. There were nights I questioned whether I was crossing a line, whether I had become the kind of person I despised. But then I reminded myself, I wasn't exploiting her vulnerability for fun. I was reclaiming what she had taken from me, my trust, my dignity, my financial security. And I was doing it carefully, deliberately, and with a moral framework. It was during one of these late-night reflections that I realized something important. The real power didn't come from money or control, though they were tools. It came from freedom. The freedom to act without fear, to set boundaries, to rebuild without apology. I began planning, thinking long-term, considering how to make her dependence consistent without compromising my ethics or my peace of mind. And, for the first time since 2019, I felt truly alive again. The culmination of all this came one evening in April 2023. Claire reached out, claiming she needed $3,000 urgently. Normally, I would have ignored it or demanded extensive documentation, but this time, I called a meeting, not in person, but over a structured email with explicit terms, repayment deadlines, proof of necessity, and a transparent plan for future requests. I watched as she struggled to comply, realizing she was no longer in control. It was almost poetic. Every demand she had once made with entitlement now had to pass through my scrutiny. Every desperate plea was filtered, measured, and responded to according to my terms. In that moment, I understood the profound irony of life. The woman who had manipulated me, drained me, and used me as a tool for her desires was now dependent on me. And I wasn't bitter. Not exactly. I was simply empowered. I had learned how to navigate betrayal, harness my anger, and transform trauma into leverage. The tables had turned completely, and for the first time in years, I was the one holding the deck. By mid-2023, the dynamic between Claire and me had solidified into something almost surreal. She was a constant presence in my life again, but now not as a wife, not as a partner, not even as an equal, but as someone who depended on me, begrudgingly, for the very lifelines she had once taken for granted. Every request she sent, every text asking for a favor, was now met with careful scrutiny. I no longer reacted emotionally. I didn't plead, I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I simply applied boundaries and watched her scramble, a reflection of the chaos she had once caused me. It's strange how empowering that is. I'd spent years feeling powerless, manipulated, and deceived, and now, for the first time in a long time, I had the upper hand. Not in a malicious way, but in a firm, unwavering sense of justice. She couldn't lie, she couldn't charm, and she couldn't manipulate me anymore. She had to play by my rules, not the ones she had imposed when she held all the power. The most poignant moment came in July 2023. She messaged me, panic-laden, asking for $2,500 to cover a sudden rent hike. Normally, I would have sent her a list of requirements, but this time I did something different. I drafted a detailed spreadsheet outlining what she owed me in total since our divorce, not just money she had asked for, but a running total of the funds she had drained from our shared account over the years. I included dates, receipts, screenshots of her messages, and even notes on her lies. Then I sent it to her with a single line, "We will start with this month's rent. Repayment schedule attached. Follow it, or handle it yourself." I didn't hear from her for several hours. Then came a message, short, clipped, "Okay." That was it. No excuses, no tears, no manipulation. Just compliance. And in that moment, I realized something important. She had finally understood that the game had changed. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It wasn't about making her suffer, though she certainly had felt the weight of her actions. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my peace of mind. I had transformed the trauma she caused me into a tool for rebuilding myself. I was no longer a victim, no longer someone whose love and trust could be weaponized against him. I was free. Financially, things stabilized as well. I began to invest strategically, save aggressively, and create buffers that ensured I would never again be so vulnerable to someone else's recklessness. Every transaction with Claire was documented meticulously, not out of spite, but to protect myself. I no longer felt the blind loyalty that had led me to drain my own resources for her whims. Every dollar I lent now came with control, oversight, and a reminder that respect is earned, not demanded. Emotionally, I felt stronger too. The isolation that had once felt suffocating became a period of profound self-reflection. I started dating again, carefully this time, choosing people who aligned with my values, who respected boundaries, and who understood the importance of trust. The process was slow, hesitant, sometimes painful, but it reminded me that I was capable of love, real love, that didn't come with hidden knives. By late 2023, Claire had stopped asking for large sums entirely. Our interactions had become transactional and strictly structured. She no longer held sway over my emotions or my decisions. And with that, I realized the final lesson of this long, painful journey. Betrayal can break you, but it can also teach you to rebuild yourself stronger, smarter, and more resilient than ever before. I still remember the moment of clarity, sitting in my new apartment one evening, the city lights of Columbus spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a quiet sense of peace settling over me. For the first time in years, I felt truly untethered. No one could hurt me again in the same way. I had turned the tables, yes, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my life. The irony, of course, was not lost on me. The woman who once played with my heart and bank account now had to rely on me, and I could finally watch with detachment, knowing that the roles were permanently reversed. She had begged, manipulated, and drained me for years, but she had underestimated one thing: the quiet, methodical strength that comes from enduring betrayal and refusing to be broken. And so, here I am, financially secure, emotionally stable, and completely in control of my own story. Claire still exists in my life, but only as a reminder of what I overcame, a shadow of the chaos I survived. Every time I reflect on the journey, I feel a mix of vindication and gratitude. Vindication for the justice life has allowed me to administer, and gratitude for the resilience I discovered within myself. The story doesn't end with revenge, nor does it end with bitterness. It ends with empowerment. The woman who once controlled everything about my life now cannot touch me. The man who was naive, trusting, and vulnerable has emerged wiser, stronger, and utterly untouchable. And that, ultimately, is the resolution I never expected but deeply deserved. Because some battles aren't won with anger or shouting. They're won quietly, deliberately, and with the unshakable understanding that your own power is the most formidable weapon of all.